Is the current world order changing?
There has been a rupture, an end to the US-led global order.
This new world order is upon us. We don't fully understand it.
The reality is we are entering into a new world order.
What even is the world order and who does it apply to? That's what the Canadian Prime Minister had us all wondering after his speech at Davos last week.
Stop invoking rules-based international order as though it still functions as advertised. Call it what it is. A system of intensifying great power rivalry where the most powerful pursue their interests using economic integration as coercion.
In many ways, he articulated what a lot of people have already been debating. And then shortly after, President Donald Trump took the stage, addressing a wide range of issues from private communications with other world leaders to US interests in Greenland to trade relations with Europe and possible tariffs. But most importantly, he reassured us that the United States is not seeking a World War III. At the same time, President Donald Trump also promoted a new international forum called the Board of Peace, which observers suggest could complement or potentially reshape existing global institutions such as the United Nations, which is long seen as central to the post-war rules-based system. Now, Trump's leadership style is often described as unconventional, but his approach has undeniably shaken up the world. And it's that uncertainty that has sparked a wave of analysis about where the world may be heading. And if all of this feels confusing, you're not alone. I've been spending a lot of time digging into the scholarship and expert analysis, and it actually does help connect the dots. So on today's Dossier, we're asking a big question. Is the world reordering, and are their old rules, if they ever truly held, beginning to fade? And can the UN really be replaced by the Board of Peace? Now, for decades after World War II, the world was organized around a shared idea. It was often called the rules-based international order. At its core, the idea was simple. Countries would respect borders, disputes would be resolved through negotiation rather than conquest, and power would be constrained by international law and institutions rather than exercised freely. At the same time, trade would expand across borders, alliances would deter war, and the system would be anchored by US leadership, militarily, economically, and diplomatically. Now, this system was never perfect, it was never neutral, and it was never applied equally. But for many countries, especially in Europe and North America, it provided something invaluable. That was predictability. Leaders could assume that borders would hold, that allies would show up, and that even rivals would operate within certain limits. Today, that predictability is fading, not because of one war, not because of one treaty, but because the assumptions that held that system together are no longer shared, even by the countries that had built it. Carney described this moment as a rupture, not a transition. According to him, the old order worked less because it was always fair or consistently enforced, and more because countries behaved as if it were real. Its power came from performance, from everyone agreeing to play their role, repeat the language, and follow the rituals. Once a major power stopped performing, as in once it acted openly outside the script, that illusion began to crack. Now, for many critics like Simon Cordall, what is happening now is not necessarily the collapse of a good system. It is the exposure of a selective one. For decades, the United States and its allies promoted international law while reserving the right to ignore it when it conflicted with national interest. Think Afghanistan, Libya, Iraq, etc. Cordall points out that big powers don't always accept the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court. For example, when the court ruled against the US in the 1980s over Nicaragua, the ruling was dismissed. When it ruled against Benjamin Netanyahu for carrying out a genocide, it was once again ignored.
The Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, and Minister of Defense, Yoav Gallant, bear criminal responsibility for the following international crimes committed on the territory of the State of Palestine.
Arms control treaties were followed when convenient, abandoned when not. Climate commitments were made and then withdrawn. And of course, for much of the global south, this wasn't shocking. It simply reinforced a belief that had existed for decades, that the rules always applied selectively. They were enforced strictly against some countries and flexibly against others, and almost never against the most powerful. Cordell writes that what changed in Davos was who felt exposed. And interestingly enough, the breaking point wasn't even Gaza, it was Greenland. As in, when a European territory, part of the Western political core, was placed under threat, only then did leaders openly acknowledge that the system itself might be finished. In that sense, what Carney pointed to was not the end of fairness, but the moment a crack appeared in the rules themselves. Now, I know President Donald Trump has a way of shocking us with his plans, but if you think about it, he's always been unusually clear about how he sees the world. In his new national security strategy, for example, he rejects the idea that rules and institutions should constrain American power. He treats alliances as transactional arrangements, not moral commitments. And he prioritizes leverage, be that economic, military, territorial, over procedure. In this worldview, trade is not just commerce, it is a security tool. Manufacturing is not just economic policy, it is national defense. And diplomacy is not about alliances, but about deals. So, for example, Greenland, through this lens, is not primarily a question of sovereignty or self-determination. It is about geography, resources, missile defense, and leverage. This thinking emphasizes US dominance in the Western Hemisphere and rejects the idea that America should manage a global system for everyone else. The logic is blunt. Power matters more than process. Some analysts argue that what looks like chaos right now is actually familiarity. Economist Ben Steele describes the current moment as a new old world order. He says that before World War I, global politics were not governed by universal institutions. Great powers focused on nearby regions, secured resources, and exercised influence directly. International law existed, but it was weak. Power spoke louder than norms. And from this perspective, US actions in Venezuela, Greenland, and the Americas follow a classic pattern: regional dominance over global stewardship. What makes today different is scale and speed. This return to old-style power politics is happening in a world bound tightly together by trade, finance, technology, migration, and climate. So actions ripple faster, backlash spreads quicker, and unintended consequences multiply. Old rules are being abandoned, but no new ones have fully replaced them yet. That's why for Europe, the shift has been deeply unsettling. For decades, European security rested on a quiet assumption that the United States would always have their back. That assumption shaped defense budgets, military planning, and political culture. Europe focused on markets and welfare states, trusting that hard security would remain someone else's responsibility. That assumption is now weakening. An example of that is how Germany, long cautious about military power, is now building what it calls Europe's strongest conventional army. Defense spending is rising sharply, troop numbers are expanding, strategic autonomy is no longer a theoretical language. For more than 70 years, NATO has been built on one simple idea, that if one member is attacked, all of them respond. That promise, known as Article 5, has only been formally used once, after the September 11 attacks when NATO allies went to war in Afghanistan to defend the United States. But President Donald Trump has repeatedly questioned whether that deal still makes sense.
The problem with NATO is that we'll be there for them 100%, but I'm not sure that they'd be there for us.
He argues that the US pays far more for Europe's security than Europe pays for its own, and that many allies have relied on American protection while underinvesting in their own militaries. From Trump's perspective, NATO looks less like a shared commitment and more like a bad deal. That frustration has led to an uncomfortable question. Could the United States actually leave NATO? Legally, it wouldn't be easy. A law passed by Congress in 2024 makes it difficult for any president to withdraw without legislative approval, meaning a full exit will likely trigger a political and legal showdown in Washington. But here's the thing. Even talking about leaving NATO changes how the alliance works. Once allies start wondering whether the US would really show up, they begin planning for a future where they might be on their own, and that uncertainty alone reshapes Europe's security landscape. Now, something I've been repeatedly reading is that while Western alliances recalibrate, China seems to be benefiting from the moment, not because it openly challenges the system, but because it is comfortable operating without rigid rules. China expands influence through trade, infrastructure, supply chains, technology standards, and finance. These are forms of power that don't require formal alliances or shared values. Pakistan itself is a great example of one of these successful alliances. A 21-country survey for the influential European Council on Foreign Relations survey published in early 2026 found that in most countries, people expect China's influence to grow faster than America's. Even inside the United States, a majority of respondents believe that China's global power would increase. A Forbes analysis of Trump's first 100 days noted that aggressive tariffs and trade disruption can encourage China to accelerate self-reliance, diversify exports, and deepen non-Western partnerships, therefore strengthening long-term resilience rather than weakening it. So, in a world where power is measured not only by military force but by economic networks and technological ecosystems, these dynamics are increasingly important. Which brings us to the next question, that is there really a next world order? Now, a lot of scholars looking at this moment agree on one thing, that the world isn't just dealing with isolated crises. Something deeper is changing underneath. Writing in the New York Times, historian Adam Tooze argues that the next world order may be shaped less by ideology or diplomacy and more by energy. Modern power, he says, doesn't just come from armies or territory anymore. It comes from electricity, data centers, batteries, and industrial infrastructure. Artificial intelligence, automation, and advanced manufacturing all depend on massive amounts of energy and scale. From that perspective, global competition isn't really about flags on maps. It's about who can power the future. And China has invested heavily in electricity, batteries, solar power, and industrial-scale energy systems. The United States, meanwhile, remains dominant in oil and gas. So what's emerging is not just rivalry between countries, but competition between energy systems. Political scientist Matthias Spector points out that much of the world outside the West is responding by hedging. These countries diversify trade, shift partners, and bargain issue by issue. For them, sovereignty isn't an abstract principle, it's something hard-won and easily threatened. Instead of locking themselves into permanent alliances, they prioritize flexibility. This is true even for countries that aren't superpowers but still matter, places like Canada, Australia, Brazil, and South Korea. They don't have the power to dictate global rules, but they do have choices. Their strategy is cooperation without dependence, working with others where it helps, and stepping back where it doesn't. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney summed this up bluntly: if we're not at the table, we're on the menu. To understand this shift more broadly, international relations scholar Amitabh Acharya argues that the world is moving away from a Western-dominated order toward what he calls a multiplex world. In this system, power isn't concentrated in one country or alliance. Instead, it's spread across regions, institutions, and networks. Asia, Africa, Latin America, and the Middle East play more independent roles. Regional organizations gain influence. Countries pursue flexible, non-aligned strategies instead of lining up behind a single leader. Acharya stresses that this doesn't mean chaos, it means multipolarity, a world with many centers of influence instead of one. What he means is that global politics don't feel fragmented right now because they're collapsing, they feel fragmented because they're actually decentralizing. But then we see the emergence of forums like the Board of Peace. Announced alongside a US-backed Gaza peace initiative, the board is meant to coordinate conflict resolution and reconstruction and includes dozens of invited countries.
Once this board is completely formed, we can do pretty much whatever we want to do, and we'll do it in conjunction with the United Nations.
This is coming as a result of President Trump's criticism of the United Nations, which he thinks is inefficient, and argues that new mechanisms are needed. Some countries have welcomed the board, others worry that it overlaps with existing institutions. Pakistan's leadership, for example, has defended its decision to join by arguing that it ensures a pro-Palestinian voice at the table and strengthens its position on issues like Kashmir. And several news sources have also reported that Kashmir may be one of the reasons that India has chosen not to participate in the Board of Peace. Now, more broadly, many are asking whether this board could eventually replace the United Nations. It's too early to say that, but here are some facts. The board was created with a specific mission to help manage a fragile ceasefire and support reconstruction in Gaza under a UN Security Council resolution. When asked directly whether it might replace the United Nations, President Donald Trump said that the UN should be allowed to continue because of its potential, even while criticizing its effectiveness. What's happening around the board shows why replacement isn't realistic right now. Many Western countries, including the UK, France, Norway, and Sweden, have declined to join the board because of legal, diplomatic, or strategic concerns, and because they see it as overlapping with the UN's role. Diplomats and UN officials point out that the UN has nearly 200 member states and decades of peacebuilding experience, something that a new body with limited membership and narrower mandate cannot simply replace. So while the Board of Peace may play some complementary roles or experiment with new approaches, especially around Gaza, it is not positioned to replace the United Nations as the central global institution for peace and security as of yet. But its very existence shows something important. Institutions are now competing, and legitimacy is no longer centralized in one place. Besides, some scholars have been arguing that the United Nations' role in the world is under growing strain, not because it has suddenly stopped doing important things, but because the challenges it faces have outpaced parts of its institutional design. Analysis from the European Institute for International Law and International Relations adds that peacekeeping missions have often been constrained by weak mandates, limited funding, and a lack of political cooperation, making it harder for the UN to prevent or resolve conflicts quickly. Both perspectives agree that the UN's efficiency and authority are being questioned, especially when major powers prioritize their own interests or when the Security Council's structure does not reflect contemporary global realities. Other analysts describe the overall shift in starker terms. Political scientist Monica Duffy-Toft argues that the rules-based order is breaking down into unrestrained spheres of influence. The United States, China, and Russia are each asserting privileged control over regions, but unlike the Cold War, these spheres aren't negotiated or clearly bounded. That makes them far more unstable, producing more flashpoints, less cooperation, and higher risk. Former US National Security official Rush Doshi focuses on the balance between Washington and Beijing. He argues that an America's first strategy risks neglecting Asia, which is the most economically dynamic region in the world, and unintentionally cedes ground to China. In his view, future power will be determined less by territory and more by technology, industrial capacity, and the ability to work with allies at scale. And historian Margaret Macmillan offers the widest lens of all. She describes this moment as one of radical uncertainty, a period where the old system is unraveling but no new equilibrium has been formed. In times like these, predictability fades, norms weaken, and mistakes become more dangerous. History suggests that these moments don't resolve quickly. They produce long stretches of volatility, shifting alliances, and crises that can spiral by accident. So at the end, despite approaching the problem from different angles, these thinkers converge on a single conclusion: that the world as it existed after 1945 is ending. What replaces it isn't yet clear, but whatever comes next will be shaped less by old assumptions and more by energy, technology, power, resistance, and uncertainty. But it's safe to say that we are now a world where the rules no longer hold the way they once did.